Welcome to This Week in Heresy, episode 35, Why Black Lives Matter in the Pagan Community, with our guest via Skype, Crystal Blanton. Hey, Crystal, welcome to This Week in Heresy.
Hi.
So I know a lot of people know you in the Pagan community, but for my audience that does not know who you are, could you introduce yourself and talk about a bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Crystal Blanton, and I am a priestess and a social worker, and I am an author. So I've written a couple of books and edited a couple of anthologies. And so mostly what I do in my day world is do social work in a middle school in Oakland and work with underprivileged youth. And I'm finishing up grad school right now, so that's a big part of who I am right now, trying to reclaim my identity after the ending of grad school. And so it's a big process. Mm-hmm. And so, as a priestess, I work a lot with social justice work as well. I'm a board member with the Solar Cross Temple. And so we do a lot of activism work and just really kind of working towards equity for people, not within the world, not just within paganism, within the world. And so I funnel a lot of my energy in that area.
Excellent. Yeah, I've seen actually a lot of I follow a lot of what you do, and I followed a lot of the writings that you've done. And I actually have one of your books, and I don't remember which one it was. It's the one of the first ones I think it was one of the first ones that you put out, because I went to your workshop at Pantheacon a couple of years ago. And I really liked it. It was about circles, like creating healthy circles or something like that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So Bridging the Gap.
That's the one.
That's the one. Yeah. And I did some workshops at Pantheacon some years ago about restorative justice and kind of group dynamics and whatnot. So I remember that's where I met you the first time. Yeah.
Well, I found that really interesting because I was just learning then, because I was just kind of starting my seminary journey. So I'm totally understanding the whole, who the heck am I after graduate school kind of thing. Because I graduated in May. So, but I found that really. Oh, thank you. Congratulations to you too.
Thank you.
But I found the book really interesting because I was really just starting my journey into learning about restorative justice, radical inclusion, and liberation theology. And so it kind of, it was one of the books many of the books at the time that kind of just blew my mind wide open about all of that. And so thank you very much for that.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And, and I found it really interesting too, because, with the way that groups tend to kind of explode, especially in the pagan community, I think it was a very useful book. And I think it's a very useful book for any high priest or leader to have. Yeah,
thank you. It was, that was mostly my motivation for writing it, just having a pretty profound experience myself in a group, and, that kind of process that we go through where we detach our professional selves from our spiritual selves. And when things kind of melt down, you figure, you sit there and you question, how did I get here? I know this stuff. I know I do this in my day job, and somehow I end up here. And, so it really kind of inspired me to do that. But mostly because I feel like all of us, myself included, don't always learn how to apply some of the stuff that we need to inside of group dynamics, inside the inner workings of our spiritual groups, and how we become like family. We get really connected in many, many ways. And then we start to recreate some of the dysfunction of family, and learning how, or having resources how to identify it. I don't feel like I have all the answers to that, but I definitely feel like many of us have some things that we can explore together so we can learn and become better leaders. So,
well, I think that's an important thing, actually. One of the things my mentor said to me when I did my ordination, my Christian ordination, was that I was a priest that was willing to learn. And it was really strange to me that was something she actually had to point out. And then I kind of thought about it. I was just like, she's right.
right? And how often do we come across other leaders that are in that place where they're not willing to learn? Or they don't know necessarily that they have anything else left to learn, which I find to be fascinating because I always feel like there's so much for me to learn. But some people don't necessarily feel that.
Yeah, and I think that's, I mean, we're gonna talk more about Pecan in a minute, but I think that's probably part of the issues, that you have come up in the last 5-6 years, between the work that we did on gender and now the work that the pagans of color are doing, is that, there's a lot of priests out there that are just like, la, 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 not hearing anything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it makes people uncomfortable. And, we're kind of conditioned to avoid discomfort instead of looking at it as a process of growth. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people want to avoid a lot of these conversations about inclusion or a lot of the conversations about race for those very reasons. I mean, that's how we're trained in greater society. If you don't talk about it, it doesn't exist.
Right. And you go on your merry lives and you can kind of put blinders on and not see what's outside of you.
Absolutely. But we know that that's not the truth.
Right.
We know that it still exists even if we don't see it. So,
Right. And, I think there's also the other direction too. It's like, oh, there's all this crap in the world and I can't fix any of it, so I'm not going to worry about it.
Absolutely. And I think on all sides that we experience that. I know I do. There are times that I would rather just not even look at the fact that these things are happening so that I can, I don't know, live in a world where I feel a part of, I guess. And the reality is that all of us kind of float in and out of wanting that to be true. And we know that it's not.
So we're going to delve into Pantheacon a bit because I know it's been huge about the discussions just online and everything that happened. And to be honest, as I mentioned before we started the recording, is that, I've heard a lot of things secondhand because I was kind of stuck in our suite. So if you don't mind, would you give kind of the rundown of what happened, and then we can kind of talk about some of the ramifications of that?
I assume we're speaking specifically about the Pantheacon kind of the satire piece.
Right, and the discussion that happened on Monday. I think it was Monday, right?
Yeah, it was Monday.
Yeah.
So, when I became aware that there was a potential issue, it was right before a panel I was moderating. So I was moderating the Bringing Race to the Table panel on Saturday. Right. And that's when I was made aware, and several of us were made aware that this satire piece was being distributed. Not by Pantheacon, but by, various people who I'm assuming were involved in writing it. Mm-hmm. And, there seems to be a long history of the Pantheacon satire newsletter at Pantheacon. Right. I wasn't aware of that at the time, but plenty of people were. And so my understanding was that several people kind of brought it to the attention of Pantheacon staff, and it got to Pantheacon programming, and they read it and went, uh-oh, and then, reached out to several of us, people of color, the POC Suite and Caucus group, and myself, and kind of worked with us to figure out how to best address it. So I became aware of it right before the panel. And, it's a satire piece. It's written like a fake program. And this, particular satire piece is, a workshop for white pagans to be able to ignore racism.
Right.
And so, what we kind of decided to do was to move forward with the panel that I was moderating. And at the very end of that panel was when the programming came in and made an announcement to the crowd that this was going on, and this had happened, and Pantheacon takes it very seriously, and trying to support all people to feel comfortable at con. And so from there, it was a matter of dealing with some of the triggers that came up for people in knowing that this was going on. And we kind of planned being able to, have this workshop on Monday, a forum, not a workshop, a forum, to allow people to kind of discuss what came up for them or what they feel or what this experience has been like. And that was actually an idea of programming, and they supported it, and they had an open slot because something else had canceled, and they kind of put us in there. So, Monday's forum was, it honestly was a forum, it was a mic in the middle. And people got a chance to get up and speak about, the different levels of experiences that they have gone through. A majority of the speakers were people of color. We did have several people that got up that were not people of color that had a chance to speak. And some of them chose to talk about allyship, and some talked about trying to understand and different theories of what allyship looks like and what it doesn't look like. And so it really was a really good opportunity for people to speak and be heard on different levels, talk about some of the various experiences that have happened, not just at this con, but at other cons and cons in past years, of what it means like to walk the halls as a person of color, and the kinds of things that we hear and the kinds of issues that we come across and how we support one another. And at the very end, we did like a ritual kind of act. And I wrote a little bit about that. It was kind of an impromptu, very powerful moment of allowing the people of color to come into the center of the circle, and those who chose to support as allies to surround us. And, honestly, like, let out a bit of that kind of primal scream, that kind of generations of hurt and pain and experience, and to let it out and let it be witnessed, let it be acknowledged in the space. And it was very, very emotional for, I would say, 98% of the people in the room, not just the people of color, but everybody. And very moving, very releasing, very inspiring. So, I think it was a really great way to segue from something that was very triggering, whether intentional or not, was very triggering to many different people, that contributed to an already tense environment for people of color, and kind of segue that into being heard and coalition building and being present for one another in a way that doesn't feel like everybody's just walking away.
That's excellent. I'm kind of thinking about some of the similarities to the gender work that we did. We had a similar situation where we were offered the same time slot, which is kind of interesting, but makes me kind of wonder, are they holding that open just in case? But, I'm sure Jamie could let me know if that's true or not. But anyway, do you think that this, because the way I felt about it when we did our work was that initial one really kind of opened up the anger and opened up the room so that anger could be heard and released, and that people can really hear the stories of the horrific treatment that people have gotten. Did you find that is kind of the similar kind of thing that happened in this case?
I think so. I think, just like I'm sure there was parallels with the previous situation, that there was some people who were really moved to express the anger and the hurt. There were some people that were moved to speak from a place of sadness and kind of share and expose that intense pain that we walk with many times, all the time. I think, people kind of showed up as they were in a very, unfiltered, raw and genuine kind of way. And that was, in my opinion, that was very beautiful to see, because it showed the wide range of how we are affected by these microaggressions, and sometimes not microaggressions, just
Right.
straight up, you know, aggressions that happen in these environments that are supposed to be safe spaces for us and to be a part of community. And they're not always. And so, I feel like, the perception is that, everybody's angry, and what we were able to show just collectively was that it wasn't just anger, it's hurt, it's fear, it's, sadness, it's grief. It's, it's all those things, it's anxiety, all those things that we carry as a result of being the marginalized group in this scenario.
Right. And it doesn't help that you've got also the national conversation going on. And there's a lot of the same microaggression and aggression just on an immense scale.
Absolutely. And I think it's because of the national conversation that we, it's kind of pushed many people to talk about things that normally we choose or they choose not to talk about because it's uncomfortable. But it's such a conversation everywhere right now that it's really hard not to allow that to kind of reflect on some of the issues that are happening in the smaller segments of our community. So I think it's because of that we are here.
It's a good conversation to have. It really, I mean, the way I've seen it is that this was a conversation long overdue in our society as a whole. But, if we, I don't know, I have the feeling that now that we've opened this up more in the pagan community, that, we can kind of be a model of the greater conversation and maybe come to some sort of way we can live with each other and not be mean to each other. Right.
I mean, of course, I think that is what the large majority of us would want from conversations like this. I can say for myself that it's not just about having some level of discord with people, which is what some people assume. Right. And actually, it's, about having the hard conversations so that we can build something together that comes to a place where everybody feels included and everybody feels okay. Which takes a huge amount of education. It takes a huge amount of discussion. It takes a huge amount of, real challenging introspective work for us to unpack our own privilege and look at our own stuff and our own biases. And, it's hard work, and a lot of people would rather avoid it.
Yeah. I mean, I know it was even hard for me because, I really try to push radical inclusion because it's just like, it's what makes sense to me. But, there are times where it's even hard for me, being inclusive of people, even the people that you don't like, is really hard.
Yeah. And it's a very interesting challenge, I think, because we want inclusion, and that comes with including people who sometimes have such different values or such different beliefs about things that are so very vital for our own survival and existence. And so it's really hard for me, I'll speak for myself, to be radically inclusive of somebody who is, overtly racist. Like, that's really hard for me. Yeah. And I'm okay with not being inclusive in that. I mean, I can honestly say that, I mean, it's an immediate threat to my ability to exist and thrive.
Absolutely.
And so, I think that line moves, and it's really hard to navigate that for all of us. So, yeah, I want inclusiveness. And at the same time, I also want safety.
Yeah. Well, when I was talking to I was interviewing somebody else the other day, and we were talking about the difference between having a healthy boundary for your own health and safety and inclusiveness. And I was also reminded about a pastor friend of mine, Pastor Tony at City of Refuge. She was also talking about that, but also leaving the door open for change and leaving that door open for them to be like, you're being a real jerk right now, but if you go away and you think about it and you come back and you're willing to listen, then I can come back and talk to you. And that's the kind of the idea she was trying to get across.
Yeah, I think that's, I don't know, I can just speak for myself that, as a social worker, I definitely believe in the power to change. I believe in the power for us to learn and expand our understanding and come back with a whole different way of existing with one another. And I also understand that with some of these topics, it's a very challenging assessment process to figure out where you put that energy and when you hold that energy for someone else who's more likely to take it. And, I think it's complicated, I think, for all marginalized populations to figure out where do you push change and where do you make decisions knowing that this is not the scenario for you. I don't know. I think it's a challenge that all of us are in a lot of the times and trying to figure that out. But I do believe in the power of change. I do believe in the power of conversation. I do believe that somebody who has biases and maybe, some kind of racist tendencies can sit down and gain a greater understanding that challenges them as a person to grow. And I do believe that. And I've seen it happen. And I've been a part of that myself in many different ways. And so it's hard. It's hard to navigate that at times, at least for me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there are times where I've seen, it's kind of like somebody flipped a switch in their brain and they're like, aha. And it's amazing to see that moment. It's just like, okay, now you're getting it. Thank you. But, I understand, like, for some people it's much harder. And, there's had to be, I've had to let go of some people for certain situations where it's just like, you're not going to understand me right now. And I'm just going to have to not be in your life. And, that I think that's hard. And I think, sometimes it can be the greater compassion to do so.
Sure. Absolutely. And, that aha moment you were talking about, like that moment where it's like, oh, all of a sudden I see something that you've been trying to tell me, but I didn't get it. That to me is one of the most important parts of what I think happened this weekend for many people who are our allies, who want to be allies, and maybe don't know how. It is that they saw some of what we've been talking about in action. They saw some of the raw moments of pain of people who were very triggered and hurt by some of the dialogue that was happening. And they got a chance to, I heard from so many allies, like, and even in some of the follow-up blogs, like, I thought I got it. And now I know I didn't get it. Now I have it more. Now I got to see it and I saw exactly what they were talking about. And to me, that's worth the moments of triggering and discomfort that I had, is to help open a door of understanding for other people in the process, so that they can be even more supportive of, POC in the space. So it's worth it. But that moment is so important.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I know I've had my own moments, especially around race, because of the church that I go to. And, for me, it was listening to stories and just being patient with myself and with other people and really hearing what has happened to them. And, I have a few stories, some of the other interviews that I've done, and it's just kind of like, this is unreal to me, because I'll never fully understand. I can't fully understand, but I can have empathy, and I can be there and be like, hey, I did this story. You got to listen to this person's story, to the next white person who doesn't understand.
Absolutely. I think the power of storytelling is it's a magic that we understand in many of our different cultures. And yet when it comes to this level of stuff, we kind of, we don't think about how powerful it really can be. I think it is definitely, or can definitely be, the glue that helps us hold each other together if we allow it to be. Listening to one another's story is such a powerful form of magic that we should always embrace.
Oh, absolutely. And, I was talking to P. Sufanis Furious Lupus, and we talked a lot about, how it can be really humanizing, because, you know, we have a tendency as human beings to really kind of do us, them stuff and really just kind of put the other and people that we don't understand into this little box over here of a caricature of what that's supposed to be. And I think it's only when you can humanize the story and really listen to someone and face them that you can really understand what's going on.
Absolutely. I say, you know, because a lot of my social work is in recovery. And so, you know, we often hear inside the circles of recovery that, you know, a person may be the closest that somebody gets to a big book. And I believe that to be the same when we're talking about issues of inclusivity and diversity, that my face, my story may be the closest that somebody has gotten to even hearing or seeing what that looks like for a person of color, what the experiences might be of a person of color. And so I take that very seriously personally. I mean, my story is very serious to me, of course, but I also take that role, that ability that I do, you know, the understanding that I do have a microphone that not everybody has. And so every time I share that story, my story might be heard more than someone else's. And so it's important to me to realize that that might be the closest that somebody gets to really hearing a snapshot of what it might be like to live in the skin. And that it might be the most powerful thing that they can get from me.
What do you think is the future of the discussion on race in the pagan community? And do you think it's kind of limited right now to our small community in the Bay Area, and then it'll have a ripple effect? And what do you think will be the future of the race discussion in the larger global community, or at least the United States community? Because I've heard it's different in other countries. So,
yeah. I mean, I have a lot of hope. I try to hold on to that. It's just too hard to operate without it. You know, I think within the pagan community, I think we're at the beginning of these discussions, and I'm very grateful for that. I think several writers have really come forward and been writing some really great stuff. So, you know, we have the new anthology that just came out, Bringing Race to the Table. And my hope is that it generates a lot of discussion.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people, there's a lot more people of color that are stepping into positions of leadership or potential leadership within the pagan community. So, you know, I think that the overall shift is happening that would show me that we're at the beginning part of being able to keep these conversations going versus, you know, like it's a thing that happened and now it's over. You know, this is a thing that happens a lot. And now we're talking, and we plan to keep talking in a way that's community oriented and supportive of, you know, overall goals. So that's my hope. You know, I think, you know, all the way from, you know, I think it was something like 40 something pagan organizations or groups made statements about Black Lives Matter. In, you know, December, I think it was November, December. And that was a catalyst to, you know, the big talked about thing that happened with Covenant of the Goddess.
Right.
And, you know, and then, you know, it's just like one thing adds to the next, that is keeping this conversation happening.
Right.
And to me, that just kind of dictates that it's time. It's time for this conversation to happen. It's not time for us to kind of sweep it under the rug and let it go away. So that's my hope. That's my hope. I think in greater society kind of perspective here in the United States, you know, I don't really know. I mean, I think, you know, they're calling it like the new civil rights kind of movement or the new civil rights era. And, you know, I believe that in many ways. And I also understand and believe the power of just decades of conditioning and disproportionality in all the ways that we see it as it applies to people of color. And, you know, the way that the government plays a role in that, and the way that overall structures and systems play a role in kind of shutting these conversations down.
Right.
I would like to believe that that it's not just people of color, that it's people of color and allies and of all kinds that are making this new civil rights era something that is sustainable. It can't be done alone by any one group of people. And the sheer numbers and power and voices speaking about and fighting for equity will help this not to be shut down by the other systems that are designed to shut it down. That's what I hope. But I think, there's always that skeptical part of me too about, I mean, we've seen this before. We know it becomes the issue right now. And then, it's picked apart and glossed over and excused away. And then people, settle back into their own biases. Mm-hmm. And then it just becomes that thing that happened, that political movement. It's not looked at as a human rights issue. It's looked at as like some kind of political movement around around the importance of Black lives, equity for Black lives. So, I don't know. I mean, I say all that to say I don't know. It's like it's between my hope and, then also like my skepticism that this time it'll be different. This isn't the first time that there's been an uprising. And I sure hope it won't be the last time.
I hope not either. And and I was thinking as you were talking, I'm wondering how the role of the internet is, how in its play in this. Because, there's kind of two sides of it. There's the role that, keeps us connected and makes us connected and is a great facilitator for getting people out there, people writing about it, people, just keeping the information flowing, which is, that's my stock in trade personally. I keep the information flowing. I talk to people. But I'm wondering how much of it is also a hindrance because, I look at things like Black Lives Matter on Twitter or something, or, the Gamergate stuff. And, sure. You've got this whole weird subsection that's like, rawr, and you should shut up and, sit down, shut up and go away.
Yeah, I think absolutely right on the money. I think it's a real great service for a time like this. I mean, I don't think we would have known even a portion of the stuff that was really happening on the ground floor at Ferguson if it wasn't for mediums like the internet. Right. If it wasn't for independent journalism and people with smartphones who can take pictures. Mm-hmm. I think the technology has really aided in stripping away some of the things that we put in place to deal with the cognitive dissonance here in, the United States when it comes to race relations. And for that is a gift. Mm-hmm. I think at the same time, I can speak for myself. I have a policy now that I don't read the comments. Right. Because something's posted and I'm more like enraged by the horrific stuff that people say in the comments more than I am damn near over the actual incidents that are happening.
Right. Absolutely.
So, I think it can be very discouraging. I think the internet shows us some of the incredible nature of what it means to have access to information. At the same time, it shows the kind of underbelly, the ugliness that comes out during these situations too, that can be very discouraging and serve to shut people down. People who would otherwise stand up and say something won't.
Right. Right. Well, yeah, I mentioned in some other places too that, I think as a humanity, we're kind of going through our bratty teenager stage. And, with the internet, especially because, a lot of that ickiness in the comments, and I'm totally with you about not reading the comments. In fact, I'm giving up Facebook for Lent for a while.
Oh, nice.
But, I think, we're seeing that people suddenly have a space to talk and, they all want to be heard and everybody's right. And so that I think that's kind of what I'm seeing coming out of this.
Absolutely. And the internet kind of gives this illusion that everybody's an expert. So everybody can write a blog, everybody can write, respond to some stuff or do some kind of preliminary research, and all of a sudden they become an expert. And It really takes a lot of investigative skills and critical thinking skills to be able to decipher who really is and who really isn't, knowledgeable in certain areas. And so with these kinds of things, these national conversations that become so fueled and so laced in bias and years of conditioning and, all that good stuff, it's really hard to have to constantly push against misinformation that reinforces the status quo in a way that is harmful to people of color. And that is, I have found that a huge majority of my own work with this in the greater society thing, boils down to dispelling misinformation for people who are spreading it and other people who are believing it. And it's discouraging in that way that there's so much of that out there. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, at least I guess we have the medium to speak back, but it becomes hard.
That's what I'm trying to do. Cause I've had a lot of, people of color, especially around when the Ferguson stuff started happening. And I had quite a few pastor friends that I was able to get on and talk about the issues and about where it's going. And so, I'll also ask you, where do you see this conversation going? Not just in the pagan community, but, where do you want to see it go? Where do you think it's going to go?
I think where I want to see it go is people actually having the tools and the vocabulary and the language to actually unpack some of this stuff that continues to disenfranchise and oppress people of color, and for some people ultimately lead to death. I would like to see that. I don't think it's going to be hey, look at all these systemic issues that promote, racism and promote biases. And now, voila, they're gone. I think, we know that that's not the case, but the inability to have the conversation in the United States is one of the hugest issues to continuing the level of bias and prejudice and bigotry inside of our systems and institutions that contribute to this. We have to be able to have the conversation. We have to be able to know what terms mean. We have to be able to understand how they're interrelated, how one side feeds the other, how we condition people who otherwise do not understand or think in any way that they are racist, and yet at the same time support systems that continue racism on a larger, more macro scale here in the United States. We have to have the conversation. So that's my hope. In my lifetime, I'd love to see that be the average conversation that we can sit down and talk to people on a broader scale about what this means. And we all have some level of understanding, of okay. And actually explore it and unpack it and, look at the rawness of it. Stop trying to cover it up. Absolutely. That's what, I would love to see. I think that's something we all can be a part of making happen. And of course, I have children. So of course, I would love to think of a day where I don't have to worry about my son going outside, driving a car and getting pulled over by the cops. I don't have to have the conversation with him about what to do when a cop pulls him over, and to keep your head down and keep your hands up and don't move fast and don't look sideways and don't look like. I would love to be able for my kids to experience the world without the fear of being the brown face. Mm-hmm. And I am also living in reality where I know that that's probably not going to be the case for their generation, but maybe for their children.
Right. And that's been a big heartbreaking thing for me to really listen to, because it's like, it was a strange thing for me personally when I was doing my work around this stuff. Cause I'm listening to the stories of this. I was like, I've known this all along. And, and it's kind of a weird thing where you're like, wait, I've known about this injustice all along. Why the hell did I just not see this earlier? And I'm like, oh, hello, privilege,
Absolutely. And I mean, again, there's one of those other conversations. They're all interrelated. Understanding privilege, understanding the intersectionality of privilege. And I think, many of us, I would venture even to say most of us, are confused about that until we actually do the work around it.
Mm-hmm.
I have a ton of privilege. And yeah, I'm a Black woman and I still have privilege, and understanding what that means and when I have privilege and when I don't, when I can see things because I'm in it, and when I don't see things because I have privilege, that pulls me back from it. And it's one of those conversations that we still can't have.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish that would change. But, I think it was after, let me make sure to tell the truth here. I think it was after the non-indictment. I think it was that time of uprising that my son, my 21-year-old, was walking out of the house. And, I was, of course, very, very triggered. And I was, he's 6'2", 6'3", bit darker than I am. Has, dreads that are a little longer than shoulder length. And, he's 21, good looking guy. And so he's walking out of the house and, it's winter, it's cold. And he has his hoodie on and he has his hoodie up and his dreads are down. They're not in a ponytail, so they're kind of swinging in his face. And he's like, yeah, Mom, I'm going to whoever's house and I'll be back. And there was this moment of panic that I had, where I literally, and I mean, it was like a cold snap here in California. It was during that time, and I literally asked him to take his hood down, put his dreads in a ponytail. And we had that conversation again before he went out to go hang out with his friends at nighttime. He is that guy. He's 6 foot something, nice build, dreads, not anything close to what a thug would be. And yet that is exactly what he would be coined as. Like in my mind, like recognizing that he is that guy. My son is that guy that would be a thug to someone else when they got scared of him. He would be the one. And that realization for me was so humbling, so horrifically scary. And it was instinctual that I stopped him. I wasn't sitting there like at that moment unpacking my own stuff. It was just that instinct, that moment where I'm like, where are you going? You can't walk out looking like that. Do you know what everybody's doing right now? Do you know how scared people are right now? And wow. I mean, it brought me to tears then, and it brings me to tears now, because I don't want to have to do that with my kid. And I don't want my kid to not be able to be a kid because he's scared that he'll get killed.
Right. Like I said, it's horrifying to me and scary, but, I can't imagine being you and being a mother with a son just after that incident and going and seeing your baby walk out the door. Just how terrifying that is. I can't imagine that because, I'm not a Black person, but, it's still horrifying to me that our system is so messed up that you have to worry about that.
Absolutely. And I know that, it's a common thing that we have to worry about in this country as Black people, and that it's not just me, and that, in a weird kind of way, that reminder to me is a little bit of comfort. I know this isn't about me. It's about a larger picture, and we have to dismantle the system, because no mother should have to sit at home and just worry about it like that. Like, you can't play outside. You can't ride with your friends. It's horrifically humbling in a way that doesn't even have words. And, because I work with youth in Oakland, I've been the social worker that's standing with the mother whose kid has been shot. And I've been the social worker that's standing with the peers or their family and friends who are then trying to come up with some level of understanding of what it means to not know who's going to be next. And I, sometimes I have my own sense of removal from that because, I'm the person of power in that scenario, as the social worker, as the person, the employee that's, doing this work. And it really hit home for me, when I had that moment myself. And I've had them before, but it really hit home for me this time of like, oh my gosh, there are some of us that live with that every single moment, every single time the door opens.
Right.
And I can't generalize for everybody, but I would, be very comfortable in saying that a large majority of Black people have that experience or have had that experience on a pretty consistent basis.
Yeah. All those stories. I mean, I've heard the same story from so many different people, so many friends. It's, it always reminds me just how messed up we are, as a society, and how dysfunctional we can be as a society.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And how that dysfunction for many populations or segments of our communities ultimately have led to death.
Right.
Or incarceration. We don't even have to talk about, the era of mass incarceration and the disproportionality of Black and brown faces in the prison systems, and not because they're committing more crime.
Right.
And that's one of those things that the average person doesn't want to believe, myself included. I mean, I don't want to believe that.
Yeah. It's easier to believe like, somebody's in jail because, they've done something bad. But, most of the people in jail right now or in prison have not done something bad. It may have just been they had a little bit of marijuana on them. And it's just like, and they happen to be a person of color, and there you go. And it's just kind of like, it's infuriating.
And scary and uncomfortable, but more than just the regular discomfort, because it's uncomfortable in the way of like, how do we change a society once we've identified how broken it is? Like where it really is our power to say like, this can't continue. When we're not in charge of the cops, the systems, the laws, the judges, it's uncomfortable in that way for me. Like in a way that I can't even, it's not the best word to describe it, but it's the best word I have.
Right. Yeah. Well, also, and it's also difficult when knowing that those in power, are denying how our society is becoming. Our society is changing, and that those in power, specifically straight, cis, old white men, are like kicking and screaming on and not liking this change, and will do everything in their power to make it not happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. On a greater scale, and even within our own smaller community of paganism, we see that, and just kind of how it reinforces the silently reinforces the status quo, and sometimes not so silently.
Right.
And, that kind of dynamic that is just so intense, where the person who is being marginalized, the person who is being harmed by these systems and dynamics, speaking out becomes a threat.
Right.
And that's really, really hard to come to terms with. But again, we're a microcosm of the greater society. So,
absolutely,
we're, experiencing exactly on a smaller level, exactly what's happening on a larger level.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think is the responsibility of clergy in all this?
Oof. Within greater society racial issues, or?
Well, why don't we start with the pagan community and kind of work our way out?
Sure. I think that clergy's responsibility is to be present, to support the ability to show up, to give counsel, to listen, to really be a mirror for what service to the individual and to the community and to the gods really look like. Like we have the opportunity to do that in action, and at the same time mirror that to a community of this is what it's supposed to look like.
Right.
And to me, I think that's the biggest thing, to be present, to show up. Mm-hmm. And I think it says so much when huge segments of our clergy officials don't even come to the table to have the conversation.
Right.
To hold hands with those who are harmed. I think that says a lot about the dynamics.
Yeah. Because, I mean, no matter what the religious community, I've seen it in both communities where, you've got these preachers who are talking about equality and everything, and yet, they're not reaching towards other people and saying, hey, let's work on this together. It's kind of like you've got your own narrow denomination, you've got your own narrow group, and that's all you're going to work on. And, you're forgetting that you're part of the greater human community that also needs to have the conversation.
Absolutely. And I think when we think about clergy and the kind of the role of clergy in general, is that it's not supposed to come down to these hard lines. It's not supposed to come down to you're one of mine, you're not one of mine. You're in this box so I can support you, but you're not in this box so you belong to somebody else. Like, clergy, in my view, at least, they reach across those lines to support the human need of one another, support in whatever is in that present moment that needs to be supported, regardless of where people fall. And I think we're still learning how to do that in paganism. And I think we have some great examples of how people do that. So I don't want to make it seem like some clergy are not, because I think they are. Mm-hmm. And yet I think, we're in that learning curve. Right. What happens when community is in turmoil, and where does the clergy stand up and support across the lines?
Right.
To create healing and change and growth for people.
And, also recognizing that, different clergy will do it in different ways, for, like for our particular group, for example, we try to be radical inclusion to the best of our ability. Granted, our group isn't as diverse as I would like it to be, but we try to be, radical hospitality, radical inclusion. We try to do that to the best of our ability, and we try to speak up to the best of our ability and do it, and, just kind of be that in our own daily lives and in interactions with people. And so, but, for other people, it may be writing a story. It may be posting a blog post. It may be writing their congressman, so, I try to talk about how, everybody does things differently, but it's still standing up for this.
Right. I think there's that role of clergy that very much has to be in action. And, and to me, I think it takes all of the things you mentioned and all the things unmentioned that from writing to speaking to praying with somebody to holding hands to holding space. Like, it takes all of those things to promote healing of an entire community and our entire society. And so, I think clergy have to be in action. It can't just be about thinking something into change. I think it has to be action.
Well, I know we could talk a lot more, and I'm sure, there's plenty of topics here that I could certainly talk to you more about, but we are out of time. So I know you mentioned the books, Bridging the Gap, and the anthology came out recently.
Bringing Race to the Table.
Right. And we'll have that in the show notes, and I'll have links to all your stuff in the show notes. But if somebody wanted to talk to you about these issues, or, just get in touch with you about the work that you do, what's the best way for them to do that?
I would say they can find me on the website, crystalblanton.com. And then I have some links on there. So there's a link to Twitter and a link to Facebook. I'm a total Facebook person. So, finding me on Facebook and sending me a message through there is a pretty good way of getting in touch with me.
Excellent. Well, we'll have all that in the show notes. And so thank you so much for being on This Week in Heresy.
Thank you. Thank you for asking and for supporting the hard conversations to be had. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Crystal for joining us this week. As always, if you have comments, questions, or would like to read the show notes, you can go to thisweekinheresy.com. You can support This Week in Heresy by subscribing to the show via iTunes or the Stitcher app, following us on Twitter at TWIH Podcast, or financially through Patreon. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.